My name is Laura Morgan. I'm 41, and I never expected my own father to humiliate me at my cousin's wedding. Ladies and gentlemen, Dad announced, tapping his champagne flute as he stood at the head table, I'd like to make a toast to my beautiful niece Sarah and her new husband, Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell. The reception hall fell quiet as everyone turned their attention to him. I was sitting at a side table with some distant relatives, trying to stay invisible in my simple Navy dress. James here is a real Navy man, Dad continued, beaming at the groom, a submarine officer, following in the footsteps of his grandfather who served in World War II. It takes real courage to serve underwater, defending our nation beneath the waves. I took a sip of water, already sensing where this was heading. Now, some of you might be wondering about my daughter Laura over there, Dad said, gesturing toward me with his glass. The spotlight of attention swung my way, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. She likes to tell people she's in the Navy too. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the crowd. Sarah, radiant in her wedding dress, shot me an apologetic look. But the truth is, Dad continued, his voice carrying that particular tone of paternal disappointment I'd heard my entire life, Laura works at some desk job on a Navy base. Probably filing paperwork or something, nothing like what James does, real military service. My Aunt Carol leaned over and whispered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "Didn't she drop out of the Naval Academy?" "That's right," Dad nodded sadly. "Couldn't handle the pressure. We had such high hopes when she got that appointment, but some people just aren't cut out for military life. She's been bouncing around different assignments ever since, never really finding her place." I watched James shift uncomfortably in his chair. He kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. But hey, Dad raised his glass higher, at least she found steady employment somewhere, even if it's not what we hoped for. To James and Sarah, may your marriage be blessed with the kind of honor and dedication that real naval service requires. The crowd raised their glasses and echoed the toast. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, watching the man who raised me publicly diminish everything I'd worked for. After the toast, people gradually returned to their conversations. I was considering leaving early when James approached my table. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "could I speak with you privately?" I followed him to a quiet corner near the bar. He looked nervous, running his hand through his hair. "Commander," he said, then stopped himself. "I'm sorry, I don't know your preferred address when you're not in uniform." I blinked at him. "Excuse me?" I said, "I don't know how you prefer to be addressed when—" He stopped, studying my face carefully. "You are Commander Laura Morgan, aren't you? Commanding officer of USS Hartford?" My heart skipped a beat. "How do you know that?" James's eyes widened. "Ma'am, you don't know who I am, do you?" "You're my cousin's new husband, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell." "Yes, ma'am, but I'm also the engineering officer on USS New Hampshire. We've been working joint operations with Hartford for the past 8 months. I've been in briefings with you." I stared at him, trying to reconcile this young man in a tuxedo with the officer I'd known professionally. "Mitchell, James Mitchell. You usually go by Jim in the wardroom." "Yes, ma'am." "I didn't recognize you at first without the uniform and with your hair down, but when your father mentioned your name..." He shook his head in amazement. "Ma'am, does your family not know what you do?" "Apparently not," I said quietly. "But you're the CO of a Virginia-class attack submarine. You've got 22 years of service. I've seen your service record: Naval Academy graduate, multiple deployments, submarine warfare pin, Bronze Star." "Jim," I interrupted gently, "this stays between us, understood?" "Of course, ma'am, but I don't understand. How do they not know?" I glanced back toward the head table where Dad was regaling some guests with another story. "Because I've never told them." "But surely they could look it up, or—" "My father thinks I'm a failure. He's thought that since I was 22 years old. When I graduated from the academy, he said I'd probably wash out of submarine school within 6 months. When I made it through, he said I'd never make it past lieutenant. When I made lieutenant commander, he said I'd hit a ceiling because women couldn't handle real naval responsibility." James was staring at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "So "Ma'am, with all due respect, your father just told 200 people that you're essentially a clerk." I heard him. And you're not going to say anything? Before I could answer, Sarah appeared beside us, slightly breathless from dancing. Laura, there you are. Are you having fun? She looked between Jim and me. I see you've met my husband. Jim, this is my cousin Laura, the one I was telling you about who works on the base. Jim opened his mouth, then closed it, looking at me uncertainly. It's nice to meet you officially, I said to him. Congratulations on your marriage. Thank you, ma'am. The way he said ma'am made Sarah look at him curiously. Why are you calling her ma'am? Sarah laughed. She's family. Jim's usually much more casual than this. Jim looked at me again, clearly struggling with the situation. It's just habit from work. Oh, right, you're both Navy. Maybe you know some of the same people. Maybe, I said. Sarah's mother, my Aunt Carol, joined our little group, slightly tipsy from champagne. Sarah, dear, you should introduce your husband to more of the family. Laura, honey, why don't you tell Jim about your job? I'm sure he'd find it interesting to hear about the administrative side of the Navy. Jim's jaw tightened. Actually, Mrs. Patterson, I'd be very interested to hear about Commander Morgan's. It's just Laura, I said quickly, cutting him off. And there's not much to tell. Pretty routine stuff. Carol patted my arm condescendingly. Oh, don't be modest. I'm sure filing reports and managing schedules is very important work too. I saw something flash in Jim's eyes. Anger, I thought. Mrs. Patterson, he said carefully, what exactly do you think Laura does in the Navy? Well, she works at the submarine base in Groton, some kind of support position. Bob, that's Laura's father. He explained that she never quite made it as an actual officer, but at least she found steady work. Jim was staring at Carol like she'd grown a second head. Sarah was looking back and forth between us, sensing tension but not understanding why. I think, Jim said slowly, there might be some confusion about. Jim, I said firmly, it's fine, really. But Jim was looking past me now, toward the head table where Dad was holding court. Excuse me, he said abruptly, and walked away before I could stop him. He seems nice, Sarah said, watching her new husband thread through the crowd, a little intense but nice. I watched in growing horror as Jim approached the head table. He said something to Dad, who laughed and patted the empty chair beside him, inviting Jim to sit. Oh no, I whispered. What's wrong? Sarah asked. I couldn't hear their conversation from across the room, but I could see Dad's expression changing as Jim spoke. The jovial smile faded, replaced by confusion, then something that might have been concern. Other people at the table started paying attention to their conversation. Uncle Mike leaned in. Aunt Patricia stopped mid-sentence in her own discussion to listen. Then Dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound was loud enough to quiet nearby tables. He was looking directly at me now, his face pale. Jim stood too, and I heard his voice carry across the room. Sir, with all due respect, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding about your daughter's naval career. The reception hall was getting quieter as more people noticed something was happening at the head table. Dad walked toward me, Jim beside him. Other family members followed, drawn by curiosity and the promise of drama. Laura, Dad said when he reached me, his voice carefully controlled. Jim here has been telling me some very interesting things about your job. Has he? He says you're the commanding officer of a nuclear submarine. The words hung in the air. I could feel the attention of everyone around us, the weight of their sudden focus. That's correct, I said simply. Dad's face went through several expressions. Disbelief, confusion, something that might have been hurt. That's impossible. Why is it impossible? Because you never told us. Because you work at a desk job. Because... He trailed off, apparently realizing how weak his reasoning sounded. Because you never asked, I said quietly. Because you decided 20 years ago what my limitations were, and you never questioned those assumptions. Uncle Mike stepped forward. Wait, you're saying Laura is actually a submarine captain? Commander, Jim corrected. CO of USS Hartford, SSN 768, Virginia-class attack submarine, crew of approximately 135 sailors. The crowd around us was growing. I could see Sarah looking stunned, Carol with her mouth hanging open, other family members whispering to each other. "But you said she dropped out of the Naval Academy," Aunt Patricia said to Dad, confused. "I never said that," Dad replied, his voice hollow. "I said she couldn't handle the pressure. I assumed." "You assumed," I repeated. "For 22 years of active duty service, you assumed." "But Laura," Sarah said, still trying to process this information, "you never said anything. At family gatherings, you never talked about being a submarine captain." "Commander?" Jim corrected again automatically, and would you believe her if she had? That question silenced the growing crowd. Because the truth was obvious. If I had walked into a family gathering and announced I commanded a nuclear submarine, they would have thought I was delusional. Dad was staring at me like he'd never seen me before, the Bronze Star that Jim mentioned. 3 Bronze Stars, actually. And a Navy Commendation Medal with Combat V. Combat? Classified operations. I can't discuss details. "My God," Carol whispered. "Laura, why didn't you ever tell us?" I looked around at the circle of faces. Family members who had known me my entire life, who had watched me graduate from high school, who had attended my commissioning ceremony when I left for the Naval Academy, who had seen me at countless family events over the past 2 decades. "Because," I said slowly, "every time I tried to share anything about my career, I was told it wasn't that impressive. When I made lieutenant, Dad said most people made lieutenant. When I earned my submarine warfare pin, he said it was probably just a participation trophy. When I got selected for command, he said they probably needed to fill quotas." The silence was deafening. "So I stopped sharing," I continued. "I stopped trying to prove myself to people who had already decided I wasn't worth being proud of." Dad's face was crumbling. "Laura, I never meant." "Didn't you? Because that toast you gave 20 minutes ago suggested otherwise." Jim stepped forward slightly. "Sir, if I may, your daughter is one of the most respected submarine commanders in the fleet. Her crew would follow her anywhere. I've served under a lot of officers, and I've never seen anyone command the kind of loyalty and respect that Commander Morgan does." "Jim," I said quietly, "that's enough." "No, ma'am, with respect, it's not enough." He turned to address the crowd. "Commander Morgan has spent the better part of 2 decades serving her country in one of the most challenging warfare communities in the military. She's responsible for a $1 billion nuclear submarine and the lives of 135 sailors. She's conducted operations I can't even talk about in places I can't name, keeping all of us safe." He looked directly at Dad. "And she's done all of this while her own family convinced her that her service wasn't worth acknowledging." The weight of that statement settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. Sarah broke the silence first. "Laura, I'm so sorry. We all are. We should have known." "Should you? How? I never told you." "Because we never asked the right questions," Dad said quietly. "Because we never... God, Laura, I'm so proud of you. I've always been proud of you. I just didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." He nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "You're right. I made assumptions, and I was too stubborn to question them. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment, but I was really protecting myself from being wrong." I looked around at the faces surrounding me, family members who had known me my entire life but had never really seen me. People who loved me, in their way, but who had never bothered to understand what that love should encompass. "The thing is," I said to the group, "I didn't need you to understand my job. I needed you to trust that I was telling you the truth about my life. I needed you to believe that I was capable of more than you imagined." Carol was crying now. "We failed you. We all failed you. You made assumptions. We all make assumptions sometimes." "But for 22 years?" Uncle Mike asked, shaking his head. "For 22 years, I confirmed." Dad reached out tentatively, as if asking permission before touching my arm. "Laura, can you forgive us? Can you forgive me?" I looked at this man who had raised me, who had taught me to tie my shoes and drive a car and stand up for myself, who had also spent 2 decades systematically diminishing my accomplishments because they didn't fit his expectations. Dad, I said finally, I forgave you a long time ago. The question is whether you can forgive yourself. I don't know how to, he admitted. Start by asking questions instead of making assumptions. Start by listening instead of judging. Start by being proud of who I actually am, not who you think I should be. Jim cleared his throat. If I may suggest, sir, Commander Morgan's change of command ceremony is next month. She's being promoted to captain and taking command of USS Virginia. It would mean a lot to her crew, and to me personally, if her family were there to see her off. The crowd turned to look at me with new eyes, as if seeing me for the first time. Captain? Sarah whispered. Pending final approval, yes. Oh my God, Laura, you're gonna be a submarine captain. I already am a submarine captain, the promotion just makes it official. Dad was staring at me with an expression of wonder and regret. Would you want us there, at your ceremony? I'd like that, I said simply. I have so many questions, he said, about your career, your life, everything I've missed. Then ask them. But Dad? Yes? Ask them because you want to know, not because you want to judge whether my answers are good enough for you. He nodded, understanding the distinction. As the crowd began to disperse, people coming up to congratulate me or ask tentative questions about my service, I felt something shift inside me. Not vindication exactly, and not quite relief. Something more like completion. For 22 years, I had carried the weight of their assumptions, their disappointment, their casual dismissal of my achievements. I had let their limited vision of me become a burden I carried in silence. But standing there in that reception hall, surrounded by family members who finally saw me clearly, I realized that their inability to see me had never diminished who I was. I had served with honor, commanded with distinction, and earned the respect of my peers regardless of whether my family understood or acknowledged it. Their recognition was nice, but it wasn't necessary. I was exactly who I had always been, a naval officer, a submarine commander, a woman who had dedicated her life to service. Whether they saw that or not didn't change the truth of it. Later, as the reception wound down, Jim approached me one more time. Ma'am, I want to apologize if I overstepped. I know you asked me to keep your rank confidential. You did the right thing, Jim. And congratulations again on your marriage. Thank you, ma'am. And ma'am? Yes? It's been an honor serving with you. I hope Sarah and I can attend your promotion ceremony. I'd like that. As I drove home that night, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Dad after everyone else had left. He'd asked me why I never fought back against his assumptions, never demanded that he acknowledge my achievements. I told him the truth, that I had learned early in my military career that the most powerful response to being underestimated was not to argue but to succeed. To let your work speak for itself. To command with quiet confidence rather than loud demands for recognition. It had taken 22 years, but tonight my work had finally spoken loud enough for everyone to hear. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my career commanding one of the most sophisticated weapons platforms in the world, responsible for national security operations that most people would never know about. But the victory that felt most complete was simply being seen clearly by the people who had known me longest. Sometimes the most profound revenge isn't dramatic or public. Sometimes it's just the quiet satisfaction of being exactly who you always were, while everyone else finally catches up to the truth.